Good evening, everyone. I'm Vicki Berry, president of the St. Louis Woodworkers Guild. And we're on site here at UPIC Hardwood out in St. Charles, where Craig Norson is going to be delivering our program in just a little bit. We're taping in advance because we wanted to make sure that members didn't feel compelled to come to an in-person meeting. Your safety and our interest in making sure everyone stays safe is the reason we went ahead and am taping this meeting. So, to get started, if you remember, way back in November, we introduced a competition called the Builda. The Builda what? Well, the only criteria we were putting to it was it had to be 5.33 board feet, and we were going to look at both your creativity and your craftsmanship. We'd originally asked for your items to be brought to our January meeting, but since that's been postponed, we are moving our deadline to our March meeting. Or if heaven forbid we don't get to meet in person by then, it'll be at our first in-person meeting. So everyone gets a little more time to work on their Builda item. We had a great year in 2021. While our fiscal year isn't up until March, I did want to share a few of the things that we've accomplished during these trying times, because it is by no one's imagination can say it's been a normal year. But the shop monitors did a great job making sure that the right protocols were in place to keep everyone safe. And we were open over 120 times in the year. Monthly safety classes continued, so we wanted to make sure everybody had the right opportunity to use the shop. There were over 60 learning opportunities and classes offered. And then, while it was a lower number than in our past years, you know, our hospitals weren't receiving as many toys, but we still managed to produce over 3,600 items for them, which took us to a total of almost 79,000 since we began counting in 1984. We even produced an additional 135 desks for our organizations. And our membership added 99 new members, taking us to a year-end number of 294. Our organization is financially strong, and our board is just as strong. There will be continuity as we move into the next fiscal year, but we will have a couple of open positions. One of them is as a director. And I believe we have a couple of candidates that have expressed some interest there. But the other position we have open is mine, the president position. I encourage everyone to think about getting involved. It's a position that, because the board is so strong and your various VPs and committee chairs know exactly what they're doing and when it needs to be done, being president of the organization has been much easier than I had ever imagined. So if you have an interest, please let one of our members know, let one of the board members know. And Tom Tierney, I believe, is leading up the search committee for our new positions. All right, with that, I want to make sure I introduce Craig Norson to you. Craig has been a great friend of the Guild. He's got an amazing location here in St. Charles, and I encourage each of you to come on out and check out all his product. Craig?
Hi, my name is Craig Norson. I'm with UPIC Hardwood Lumber. I am the owner, operator, and founder of this business. I've been invited to speak to you today regarding the purchasing of hardwood lumber. What I'm going to do is speak about my credentials, my career in the hardwood lumber industry. Then we're going to speak about terms, which I think is the vocabulary, the jargon is extremely important. Then we're going to talk about the drying of lumber, and then we're going to talk about the grades of lumber. So, first of all, my career started in 1984. I was a disgruntled college student and had a friend of mine from high school that had attended this little trade school in Memphis, Tennessee. It was the National Hardwood Lumber Association Inspection School. It was a 3.5-month long course, the equivalent roughly of 1 semester in college, and the tuition was actually less than college tuition. The expensive part was the room and board. Nonetheless, went through the school and my first job was as a lumber inspector in Eldon, Missouri, which is just north of Lake of the Ozarks. The company that I worked for, they were a multifaceted lumber operation. They had a very large cedar closet lining manufacturer. They had a hardwood sawmill, a hardwood dry kiln, and it was very educational, to say the least. I worked there for approximately 2 years, and then I was hired on in St. Louis, Missouri, a company, an old line company, approximately 120-year-old company in downtown St. Louis, right off of the North Riverfront. I worked there for 7.5 years. During that time, they sent me to the University of Minnesota in 1986 to get certified as a kiln operator. They promoted me into purchasing, sales, and logistics, and I took care of those responsibilities until I left in 1992. In 1992, I went to work for a company in Florida. I started a sales office for them here in the St. Louis region, hired a couple of people, and did that for approximately 4 years. And after that, it seemed to me that the logical evolution for my career was to start my own company. In 1995, I started North State Hardwoods Incorporated. We were in business, essentially until 2010. The Great Recession really put a big damper on the entire business model of brokering lumber. And it wasn't just the recession, it was also the burgeoning internet commerce that inhibited our ability to function as a brokerage company. With wonderful lumber suppliers in hand and a building that was bought and paid for, we decided to throw our shingle up and start retailing lumber to the St. Louis market. It's been very good. It's a much easier business model to manage, and we've experienced very nice growth over the last 12 years, and I'd like to kind of declare that we have successfully reinvented our business model, and I'm very happy about that. Next, we're going to talk about some terminology. I think the vocabulary, terminology, jargon, if you will, is critical to especially beginners who come in here. Oftentimes we can recognize somebody rather readily as to whether or not they're properly using the terms and the jargon in the industry. For those of you who are using this as an educational tool, I would emphasize the importance to familiarize yourself with the terminology so that you don't look like a fool, you don't look like a newbie. It's okay everybody has to be a rookie sometime. However, it just enables you to speak commonly with your fellow woodworkers, and it also enables you to speak intelligently when you come into a lumber store and ask for certain things. We can move you to where you need to go quicker if the terminology is locked in. And I'll give you some examples along the way as far as the things to do and the things not to do as far as using the language. The first thing we're going to talk about in terms of terminology is board footage. Board footage is not to be confused with square footage. It's not to be confused with lineal footage. Board footage is how most hardwood lumber is sold. Board footage is a cubic measure, whereby you take the square footage times the thickness. This, for example, is 4/4 poplar right here, and you would basically take the square footage times 1 inch. 4/4, for those of you who are new, is lumber jargon for 1 inch. In the lumber industry, 1 inch does not necessarily equal 1 inch. This happens to be S3S material down to 13/16, but it is still considered and counted as 1 inch lumber, which we refer to as 4/4. The 4/4 board footage is calculated by taking the square footage, length times width, which gives you your square footage, times the thickness. In this particular instance, I oftentimes tell people when you're multiplying times 1, they're one and the same. In the 4/4 thickness, it is the one time where board footage equals square footage, because you're basically taking that square footage times 1, which whenever you multiply something times 1, it basically equals the same as the basic number. On that issue again, to demonstrate that, we have a piece of 3-inch thick, what we would refer to as 12/4 walnut. With this piece, you would basically take your square footage and you would multiply it times 3 in order to arrive at your board footage. Again, you take your square footage, and because it's 3 inches thick, you multiply it times 3 in order to arrive at your board footage. Board footage is something that a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their mind around. I oftentimes bring people back to square footage. Most people understand square footage, and they can, or if they don't have a ready-made understanding of it, they can quickly grasp the whole notion of square footage. We take the square footage and you multiply that times the thickness. To me, that's the simplest route to get there. There are other people that have different ways of figuring the board footage, but that is the way the industry has taught me to do it, and that is how I convey it to our fellow customers. The next thing we're going to talk about is thickness. Thickness, I started to touch on it earlier in terms of the 4/4 thickness equaling 1 inch. We'll just basically talk about the 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 8/4, 10/4, 12/4 jargon. 4/4 is a fraction, 4/4. It's if you convert that fraction 4/4, it equals 1. 5/4, by the same token, you convert 5/4 into a whole number and you come up with 1.25 or 1 1/4. So, and it goes onward. With the 8/4, we're going to jump to, it's basically 8/4, which means 2 inches thick. And you would basically take your square footage and you multiply it times 2 to arrive at the board footage. Now, there are other footages out there that you'll hear of. That we just talked about square footage, and that's not to be confused with board footage. Square footage is a flat measure of surface measure. There's also lineal footage. A lot of moldings and S4S are sold on a lineal foot measure. Given the fact that most hardwood lumber is sold on a random width and length basis, lineal foot is not applicable because all the boards are different in width, and you need uniformity in order to accurately sell or present something for sale on a lineal foot basis. There, again, is the square footage, and then the board footage is the primary means that hardwood lumber is bought and sold on. Next, we're going to talk about the surfacing versus rough, basically the machined degree of the product. At the very beginning, there's rough sawn. Okay, rough sawn is fresh off the saw. You'll have saw marks. It oftentimes is a little more variable in thickness than a surfaced product. When we say surfaced, that is another word for planed. In our particular instance, we have our S3S material that has not only been planed, but it's also been sanded to 150 grit finish, and it's also been straight line ripped. Not all of our products have the S3S specification, as we have found in some instances that our customers prefer to have a little more meat left on the bone in terms of the surfacing specification as well as the straight line ripping. What I mean by that is with our exotics, we have all of those, all in the 4/4 thickness, we have those surfaced to 15/16 hit and miss. And hit and miss is another term that is basically, it's sometimes referred to as a skip dress. It's where the planer just barely skips over the wood. Some people call it sizing. I like to have most of our lumber at minimum hit and miss surfaced so that the inspection people can accurately grade the lumber after planing. Sometimes when dealing with rough lumber, it's very difficult to ascertain what is beneath the surface. The rough texture will hide defects. It'll hide sapwood if that's undesirable. It'll hide heartwood if that's undesirable. It's a high-risk way to buy lumber that is in the rough. A lot of people come in and they say, well, I'd really rather buy rough because I want to save the money on the machining, and the guy who sold me the planer told me I could buy my lumber cheaper. Well, the machines that we have that run this product through the machining process, whether it's the straight line rip, whether it's the planer, whether it's the sander, they run 8,500 feet an hour, and we get it done for pennies. The uniformity is impeccable. It's money well spent to buy the product already surfaced, taken down as far as you can. You'll save time and money that you would spend keeping the planing, your planer up to speed, running, sharpening blades, et cetera, as most people don't have a full-blown industrial planer or a full-blown industrial sander at home at the ready. So I'm a huge fan of it, and then back to my original point, by purchasing lumber that is surfaced, you can see what you're getting. When you buy lumber, you're going to have, in the rough, you're going to have a lot of negative surprises when you run it through your planer. There's rough, there's S2S, there's S3S, and there's S4S. We're going to go over what those mean. We talked about what rough is. That's fresh off the saw. It's got the saw marks in it. We talked about S2S being a hit and miss dressing. Again, dressing is the same thing as planing. We talked about hit and miss. That's what an S2S hit and miss is. It's basically a skipping or a skimming over the board to clean it up enough for a lumber inspector to get a good look at it and ascertain whether it has, problems and how to grade it accordingly. S3S implies that it has a finished thickness, and what a finished thickness basically is, in 4/4, it's 13/16. According to NHLA rules, by the book, 13/16 is considered a finished surface thickness for 4/4 lumber. Now, as it relates to the finished thicknesses for other thicknesses, any lumber 6/4 or less, you take 3/16 off of the nominal. And basically that would imply that you have 5/4, that is 1 1/4 nominal thickness. You take 3/16 off of that. Therefore, the finished thickness for 5/4 lumber is 1 1/16. 6/4, again, the nominal thickness for 6/4 lumber is 1 1/2. You take 3/16 off of that, and it comes down to 1 5/16. 1 5/16 is the standard surface thickness, and again, the lumber needs to clean up at that level, otherwise it's considered Scantron thickness, and it will go down to the next thickness. Above 6/4, the standard surface thickness is 1/4 of an inch less the nominal thickness. For example, 8/4 lumber, 2 inches thick in the rough, the standard surface thickness for it to be legally 8/4 is 1 3/4. And again, I get back to my early quote about how in the lumber industry, oftentimes when they say 2 inches, it's not really 2 inches, as standard surface thickness for 2-inch lumber is actually 1 3/4. So hopefully that gives you a semblance of understanding of the 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 8/4 thickness jargon. And hopefully it also gives you an understanding of the surfacing specifications, starting at rough and going to hit and miss dressing, then going to finished thicknesses. And then the S3S, I wanted to explain that. Not only is it cleaned up at standard surface thickness, which in this case is 4/4, and it would be at 13/16, but the S3, where the 3 comes from, is you have 2 faces, 2 faces that are cleaned up, and you also have 1 edge that is straight line ripped. That's where you get your S3S. The next specification up is S4S. Now S4S we don't sell, but basically that's a dimensioned product where you'd have all 1x4s, 1 inch thick, 4 inch wide, 1 inch thick, 6 inch wide. The big box stores oftentimes sell red oak and poplar in S4S. Okay, that covers that. Now we're going to talk a little bit about width and length and thickness. We have people come in here all the time and say, I need a board that is 8.5 inches thick. And we say, well, 8.5 inches thick, we don't have anything that thick. Well, I just needed 1 inch in thickness, and they get cobbled up in the how they're defining thickness, how they're defining width, and how they're defining length. I'm just going to grab this board here real quick. The thickness, we just talked about 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 8/4. This is a 4/4 poplar board, but that's the thickness. Just again, this may seem rudimentary to some people, but just so if you're new into this, you want to come in with the right mindset as far as understanding the vocabulary. The width, this would be the width of the board. Okay, and some people come in thinking that that's either the thickness or the length, but that's what we consider the width of the board. And then the length of the board is the full length of the board. This is an 8-foot long board, okay? So length, width, and thickness. Painfully simple, but it's amazing how many people come in with the wrong mindset as they use those terms. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about heartwood and sapwood. Heartwood is the center of the log. It's generally a browner product. It is in walnut and cherry and other darker woods. It is desirable in those species and other darker woods. The sapwood is oftentimes undesirable. In the maples, counter to that, the white sapwood is the desirable part of the log, and the heartwood, which is again the center, is the less desirable part of the log. We have a piece of soft maple right here. As you can see, it's virtually all white sapwood. I have a piece of lumber here. It's a piece of walnut picked out, and you can see the dark heartwood, and you can see the light sapwood. Most people prefer to get their boards all heartwood. And we have a stack of walnut right here that has been selected. We call it an 80-90 spec, where it's at least 80% on the poor face is heartwood, and 90% or more on the good face is heartwood. It's a proprietary grade that we came up with, and our customers seem to like it very well. By the same token, we would have something like this, which would not make our proprietary grade, and it's over in a discounted pile. But nonetheless, sapwood, the blonde, heartwood, the dark, okay? And maple here is all sapwood, And again, that's what's desirable. Oftentimes people desire the heartwood in the walnut and the cherry. I'm going to set this down here for a moment and come back to it. I've got a little simple diagram I drew up here. And you can look this up if you want to Google heartwood versus sapwood. I'm sure in the images section you could find all kinds of much better drawings than what I whipped up here this morning. But if imagine this is the end of a log. You can see the outer ring is sapwood and the interior part of the log is the heartwood. Okay? The sapwood, generally speaking, is much lighter in color, and the heartwood is much darker in color. Okay, next we're going to talk about plain sawn and quarter sawn and what the difference is there. What it is, before I bring my prop out, it's basically how the lumber is sawn, how the boards come out of the log. Plain sawn, which is most common and most efficient, is basically where you have a round log and they open it up, cut a couple, turn it flat, open it up, they basically square it, and then they continue to rotate that log around, and they're just taking more and more off of it as they take it around. I'll show you real quick. This is an actual white oak log, and if you look carefully, plain sawn, as you can see, that would be a plain sawn or a flat sawn. That's just another word for it. That's how it would come out of the log. And the growth rings in a plain sawn board are arching. They reach from one edge of the board to the other, and they have a tendency to arch. In the softwood industry, they call that crowning. And I believe you turn a crown upside or downside, depending upon the application and the effect that you want. Then quarter sawn comes out of a log like that. Quarter sawn is a much less efficient way to saw lumber, but it's more desirable. It's said to be more stable, and the quarter sawn also creates a figuring, which I have a sample I'm going to show you real quick. But anyway, that's how it comes out of the log. It's the same species, it's just how it comes out of the log. Now we carry plain sawn and quarter sawn in the white oak only. But there are some people out there who really like quarter sawn sycamore. It has a real psychedelic grain to it. Quarter sawn red oak is mildly popular as well. Let me get these samples and I'll show you those real quick. And again, if the video presentation doesn't accurately depict what we're trying to convey, you can always Google it, quarter sawn versus plain sawn lumber, and things will come up, and you could go into red oak or white oak or sycamore or any species that you're contemplating using and choose accordingly. But this is plain sawn, and again, I'm going to show you the growth rings, if you can see those there. Hopefully the video photography will accurately depict that. And then it just has a cathedraling grain that's very common. This is the quarter sawn. First of all, we'll take a look at those growth rings, and you can see that the growth rings are perpendicular to the surface of the board, much like the diagram, the log diagram that I showed you. And what it brings out is I've heard it referred to as striping, and it's a striping of the rays in the wood. Interestingly, had a young lady refer to it as stretch marks. It's not really stretch marks, but it kind of looks like stretch marks. Okay, so that's quarter sawn and plain sawn. The next one we're going to talk a little bit about, just real quickly, is shake. Shake is known as a separation in the growth rings. I found this sample, thought it was a good one. You can see how the separation, which is a defect, runs along the growth rings, and that's what shake is. Shake is a separation that runs along the growth rings. So, got that. The next one is wane. Wane, spelled W-A-N-E. Wane in the lumber industry is defined as bark or lack of wood. You may have heard a weather forecaster say that snowfall is expected to wane around 3 p.m. today. Well, it just means it's coming to an end. Wane in the lumber industry, we've got a little bit here, is defined as bark or lack of wood. And it's basically where the curvature of the log has basically remained yet on the board. The board hasn't been completely squared up on all 4 edges. Weighing is allowed in the upper grade of hardwoods, but there are strict limitations on it. So we'll get into that a little later as we start to discuss the grades. Honeycomb. Honeycomb is a word basically that means internal checking. Here's one, it's kind of an internal checking as well as shake. This is probably the best sample that I came up with. Again, it's on the interior part of the piece. Sometimes you'll see it shooting up and down throughout a piece. It's basically the result of improper drying too fast, and it's a real problem when you get into using that board, you know, whether you're making a countertop or cabinet or whatnot. The next one is split. Split is real easy. Now, this is a piece of hard maple. Just going back a few minutes, this is the white sapwood, which in maple is very desirable. This is the brown heartwood that kind of flares into a little bit. This board has an end split. Some people would refer to it as an end check. I wouldn't argue the point either way. In the lumber industry, a split goes all the way through, a check does not. When I say going all the way through, I mean all the way through the thickness. A check would be more of a surface check, an opening in the skin of the lumber. So, going to move down to bow, cup, and twist. We don't have a whole lot of bow, cup, and twist. Hopefully it would be self-explanatory. I did find this piece that was over by the door, and it's gotten wet a few times, but you can see how it is cupped. And that's not a good side. This side's better. When you lay it flat, you can see how it cups up, you know, almost as though it's ready to hold some water, like a cup would. But that's a definition of cup. Twist. I've got a little piece of cherry here that I saw last night. Kind of a long piece. Whenever you have a long piece of wood, it's hard to keep it from having some kind of flatness issue. But as you look down this board, you can kind of see how it twists a little bit. So that gives you an idea. And twist should also be somewhat self-explanatory. Okay, moving onward. Pith. We're going to talk about pith. That's another fun word to use. This is the pith. You can see it. It's basically the soft center of the log. It's the heartwood of the heartwood, you might say. And it runs, this particular piece, it runs, there's pith, sorry, there's pith along here. And again, it's a soft center of the wood, and it is a defect. Whoops. Every log has pith. Generally speaking, it's down around the lower quality of the log. So next, we're going to talk about burls. Burls are generally a swirling of the grain around the knot. A knot. Sometimes a burl can be a swirling of the grain. How you discern whether or not it's a defect, a knot is a defect, is whether or not it has a black center. I have seen lumber inspectors scratch and argue, saying, well, there's a center there. Well, no, there's not. And they scratch a little bit further. It's not a big deal, but it's something you can understand. A lot of woodworkers like burls. Burls are where you'll get some wild and crazy grain. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Burls can be tricky to work around, as a lot of times there's for lack of a better word, queer stress in and around the knot. And it results in really pretty, wild, psychedelic grain. We call it figuring. But it can be cantankerous to work with. Again, lots of stress and lots of weird things going on in and around a knot. Okay, one last thing we're going to talk about just real quick and lightly as it relates to terms. Mineral streaks and spots of similar nature. Very common in hardwood lumber. You got this piece of maple with some. You'll see it in red oak quite frequently. They're just little dark splotches. They're not heartwood. They're not an insect track. It's just what we call a mineral streak and spot, or streaks and spots of similar nature. In excess of 1/12 the surface measure of the wood will degrade at 1 grade. So. Okay, that's all I have in the basic terminology. I would emphasize getting very familiar with the 4-quarter, 5-quarter, 6-quarter, learning to talk that talk, I think it will benefit you immensely, again, in conversing with your fellow woodworkers, as well as walking into a hardwood store and asking them for what you're looking for. Then the rough, the S2S, the S3S, the S4S, that's something even some experienced woodworkers are not real well versed on all of that. We have to explain it to them. Those are the things that really will set you in the right direction. Now we're going to talk about drying, the drying of lumber. As it relates to drying lumber, you start out with green. That's fresh sawn. It's defined as fresh sawn right off the saw. Then you have air dried. Air dried lumber there's a wide variety of air dried. Is it air dried for 2 weeks? Is it air dried for 2 months? Is it air dried for 2 years? Getting it properly dried is a real trick. If it's not properly dried, you're going to possibly have problems with splitting, cupping, glue joint failure. I got 2 calls this week. People had the resin tables, the epoxy tables, the river tables that are very popular these days. They're beginning to fail. People went out and they got a deal from somebody on a live edge slab. It was pretty. They put it into their product. They spent hundreds of dollars on epoxy, and now it's failing because the wood is moving. It's a nightmare, and it's a high dollar nightmare. So anyway, our lumber is all kiln dried to 6 to 8% moisture content, which is the industry standard. It's also stress relieved and equalized. We tell people you can put our product in $1 million home and you don't have to worry about any liability. And I can't tell you how many contractors we've had to bail out because they got a deal, put in a live edge countertop into a beautiful brand new home, and it failed. 6 months later, it's cupping up, it's splitting, and they have to come and replace it. So that's my warning. The drying of lumber is critical. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the grades. The grading of hardwood lumber is established by the NHLA rules, National Hardwood Lumber Association rules. There's actually a rule book here that you are required to memorize verbatim that pertains to the issue. In grading of hardwood lumber, the top grade is considered FAS, which stands for first and seconds, or select and better. Either one is the top grade. And the grades are established by considering the amount of good and usable wood within the piece of lumber. In the upper grade, it's 82 2/3% or more good and usable wood is required in order for it to make that grade. Most of our product is probably in the 98% or plus higher because of the way I procure the product. I should tell you that on an average log run, the face and better grade runs approximately 8%. In some species it's higher, in some species it's lower. But they open up a log and they have the clear lumber on the outside, and as they continue to move towards the center of the log, they get into the 1 common grade and the 2 common grade, and at this very center where the pith is oftentimes a cant, a pallet cant or a railroad tie or something along those lines. But anyway, back to the Select and Better Face and Better grade, a little bit about that. The Select and Better grade allows for a smaller board. The minimum width in the green, in the rough, for a Select and Better board is 4 inches wide, and the minimum length is 6 foot long. Whereby in Face and Better, again, it's 82 2/3% or more clear and usable wood, but the minimum size board in a Face and Better grade, in the green, in the rough, is 6 inch wide by 8 foot long. The next grade down is the 1 common. 1 common is a cabinet grade. The percentage of clear and usable wood on 1 common is 66.6%, 2/3. And it is a grade that is 1 lower than the top grade. We have a little bit of 1 common in our facility in the form of some local cherry that we have, as well as some slightly lower grade walnut that we have. Both are very heavily discounted, and they're both very good movers for us. They're inexpensive, and if you have smaller cuttings, then you can make good value. You can utilize them very well. The next grade down is 2 and 3 common, oftentimes put together, and that is a flooring grade. That is what your Bruce Hardwood Floors would buy. They buy it in wholesale fashion, obviously, in the 4/4 thickness, and basically they'll cut it into strips of all different size, random length, and they utilize it for flooring. Below that, there's basically sound stock. It goes into pallet applications. It'll go into railroad tie applications. It's basically the center of the log. And again, something that a lot of people don't realize is that you have a log, the outer part of the log, the lumber that comes off of the outer part is clear wood. That's where your FAS and your Select and Better grade will come from. As you saw further into the log, knots begin to appear. Defects begin to appear. Then you start hitting your 1 common. And then towards the center of the log, you start hitting your 2 and 3 common. This is true with every log. Veneer log, I once had a gentleman, very highly educated gentleman, say, there's not a low-grade piece of lumber on that particular facility. He was bragging about an outfit out east that handled a lot of high-end wood. And I just put my head down and thought, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, as every log has low-grade material within it. Not a log out there will be clear wood all the way through. It's just the way it is. The history of the grades, basically, the NHLA was formed in the late 1800s, right around the turn of the century into the 1900s. The rules were put together to facilitate national marketing of hardwood products. Prior to that, most things were local, as you can well imagine. The lumber produced was sold locally. Here in Missouri, which Missouri is the walnut capital of the world, here in Missouri in the late 1800s, they were making barns out of walnut. Seems crazy to imagine right now, but with the price of walnut. But things were very localized. We didn't have interstate highways. We were just in the railroad industry was just burgeoning. Things were very, very local, and as we began to get the railroad expansion throughout the country, and we started marketing things more nationally, there needed to be a guideline, a set of rules that would be applicable to the guy in Hayden, Kentucky that was sawing red oak when he sold it to some guy out in Los Angeles, which was growing in leaps and bounds. There had to be an understanding, and that's how the grading rules came to be. As it relates to woodworkers, When you come here, 98% of what we carry is the top grade. Not a problem. When you go to wherever you may go and somebody tries to sell you something that clearly does not have 82 2/3% or more clear and usable wood, and they try to tell you that it is a Face and Better or a Select and Better grade, you can tell them they're wrong. It's as simple as that. Or you can recognize them for being a liar or unknowledgeable. And there's a lot of that out there. Unfortunately, and I'm not here to bash the producers that are out there, but there's a lot of mavericks out there that are doing whatever they can to try to derive some value out of trees that they may have happened into. That kind of covers the guts of what I wanted to talk to. There is another thing that I want to talk to, and I've touched on it lightly, the lumber industry. A lot of people, or at least I sense that a lot of people in the guild and a lot of people who I sell to don't understand the lumber industry. It's not nearly as big as it was 20 years ago. It's not nearly as big as it was 50 years ago. However, there's an industry out there. I didn't sell one stick of lumber locally probably until 2010. And I started in this lumber industry in 1984. Up until 2010, we were shipping lumber to California, Mexico, Canada, here throughout the Midwest, into the North Carolina furniture market. We sold an awful lot of lumber into the Elkhart, Indiana RV and conversion van market, semi-load after semi-load after semi-load. And that's the business that I grew up in. Now, this retail market, people don't seem to understand that there's a larger industry. And one of the things that I'm alluding to is the notion of acclimation. In the industry, if you said or told a customer that you need to acclimate your wood, you never sell it. In the industry, when they're buying, say, 200 semi-loads per week, and they're working on just-in-time inventory, you get a 12,000 board foot semi-load of lumber that arrives on a Tuesday at 10:30. By 12:30, it's being cut up. By 4:30, it's being glued up. There's no acclimation allowed. And yet we have this continuing, fallacy in my mind that, acclimation is and I think what has happened is there's been generations of homegrown woodworkers that have procured their product from suppliers that do not professionally dry it, and therefore the acclimation may be required. I can tell you this, when you take our lumber home, you can work on it the next hour. There's no acclimation required. That much I can tell you. But that's one of many things that I've heard in my time in dealing with the general public that make me kind of scratch my head a little bit. There's a number of other things out there, but when I initially started selling retail, when I would hear things like the acclimation conflict, in my mind I responded, that just doesn't, I wanted to argue the point and explain to people the proper way. If you bought your lumber properly dried in the first place, again, 6 to 8% moisture content, stress relieved and equalized, you wouldn't have to worry about such a thing as acclimation. But I've concluded over time that a lot of guys and gals have made a lot of really nice projects out of lumber that hasn't been professionally dried. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And the more often you deal with wood that is improperly dried, the more likely you're going to get into some problematic situations. Nothing is foolproof. As I mentioned earlier, in the industry, You still have kiln degrade, you just want to control it and keep it at a bare minimum. As a woodworker, ask a lot of questions. You know, how long has, if the lumber's air dried, how long has it been air dried? Remember that on 1-inch lumber, there's a lot more liberty. It doesn't necessarily have to be professionally kiln dried. You can get away with more. It's more forgiving. However, when you get into 3-inch material or 2-inch material, anything thicker than 6/4, I would say, you're going to want to try your best to make sure that it's been properly kiln dried, equalized, which means that the core is equal with the shell in terms of moisture content. Otherwise, you could be asking for a lot of troubles. With all that being said, again, the main thing, two points, if I really wanted to strongly convey them, would be to familiarize yourself with the terminology and learn how to talk the talk, learn the jargon, as that will just enhance your ability to communicate and learn with people that your fellow woodworkers, as well as the merchants that you may buy product from. And then the second thing is, nothing is foolproof. I am trained by the industry, certified lumber inspector, certified kiln operator, et cetera, et cetera. I've been shipping lumber all over the country and into Canada and the US and in Mexico. Being trained by the industry, we have certain ways of doing things, and counter to that, there are some homegrown methods that sometimes I'm prone to not see eye to eye with. It doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong. I oftentimes tell people, just behind you is the garage door where a lot of customers come in when the weather is permitting. You could ask 50 people the same woodworking question, same lumber question when they walk in the door, and they could all be experienced woodworkers, and you're going to get 50 different answers. It's that kind of an endeavor. I don't think the one golden rule is there is no golden rule, in my opinion. So, okay, we're going to field some questions that were emailed in, and we'll do what we can.
I'm Bill Schuchat, Vice President of the Guild. Because this presentation is being pre-recorded, I solicited questions from members because there won't be a live question period at the end of the talk. So here we go. Where do you source your different lumber from?
We source our lumber from where the quality is the best. Now, cherry, for example. In the industry, the saying, decades-old saying is there's no cherry like Pennsylvania cherry. We do, however, carry a local cherry that is very competitively priced. But if you look at the difference between the Pennsylvania cherry that we have and our local cherry, you would see the difference just immediately. The Pennsylvania cherry grows at 1,500 feet of elevation in the Allegheny Mountains. It's more of a gun barrel log. It's much better for lumbering, whereas the cherry that grows in this area is at roughly 550 feet of elevation. It's more of a shrubby tree. It's not a great lumbering tree. Missouri is definitely not known for its cherry. Pennsylvania is. So we try to go to where the quality is best. All of our maple comes from Michigan. Michigan is world renowned as having the best maple in the world. We buy our hard maple, our soft maple, our red leaf soft maple, our curly maple, our bird's eye maple, all comes from Michigan. Our poplar comes from an Amish supplier in Ohio, widely regarded as the best poplar supplier in the country. They do a fine job for us. They've been doing that for, I don't know, 30 years. Our exotics we have about 12 different importers that we use on a regular basis to try to keep us a very consistent and reliable supply of imported woods. When possible, we will procure product locally. So hopefully that gives you an idea. We kind of, it's all over the country and as it relates to exotics, all over the world. And we try to default to where the best quality is.
Very good. Next question is, how do you determine what thicknesses you have in inventory? Because not all lumber is kept by you in like 5/4.
Right. Our customers guide us to that. 4/4 is the most universal thickness that is produced out there, 1 inch. As it relates to 5/4, 6/4, 8/4, what else to carry? We have more or less allowed our customers to guide us, their input, their feedback on what they need. In the early days of establishing our retail store, we would have somebody, say for example, ask us for the 3-inch walnut. We had never stocked any up until that point in time. We inquired as to how much they needed. If they needed enough for us to justify bringing in a pack, we would bring that pack in, and let's say it was a 400-foot pack, they would buy their 100 feet and we'd carry the remainder, and if it continued to sell well, which it does, then we have justification for keeping it.
Next question is, how do you calculate board feet when the board isn't necessarily an even inch width or an even foot length?
Okay. I'm not, as it relates to an even foot length?
Yeah.
In the industry, if you have a board that is 8 foot 6 inches long, the industry, by the rules, tells us to measure it as an 8-footer. You get the 6 inches free, okay? Now, in the international rules, exotics, and we do this, and we, within our shop, if there's overlength, and most of our wood has anywhere from 2 to, most of it you'll find 2 to 3 inches of overlength. Some of it you'll find 6, 7, 8 inches of overlength. That's free wood to you. It'll be measured on the foot. However, with some of the high dollar exotics that come in heavy to 3 and 4 foot lengths anyway, that is calculated by the inches.
Okay.
If I could expand upon that, basically, the math of board footage, in the industry, we use the width in inches times the length in feet. And as I just said, if there's overlength, that's yours for free. Again, the length in inches times, the width in inches times the length in feet, and then you divide by 12. For example, if you have a 6-inch wide board, 8 foot long, 6 times 8 is 48, divide by 12, there's 4 board feet in that particular board, assuming 4/4, even if there's overlength. In some of our shorter exotics and other companies, in the name of profit enhancement, they will not give you the overlength for free. They'll charge you by the inches. And the math on that, when you're doing the inches, is you have the width in inches times the length in inches. You're not getting those free overlength that the industry does and that we do. Length and width, both in inches, then you divide by 144. That's the math on that. So the industry goes width in inches times length in feet, overlength is yours, and divide by 12. If you're going in a lot of board footage apps that you'll have in your phone, they'll do the inches. You know, you put in the inches in width, inches in length, and then you divide by 144 because it's all inches. So that's kind of how you arrive at that.
Do you have any tools that you sell?
We do. We do sell Festool. It's a line of high-end woodworking tools. I wish Eric was here. He's kind of our in-house tool guru. But we do sell Festool. It's a fine product. They have the backbone of what they sell is their dust collection system.
Can you deliver?
Yes.
Wood?
Yes, we have limited delivery abilities. Most of the time that we do deliver, it is me in my pickup truck. We have engaged with couriers, local couriers that have also shipped product from here.
Are there any hardwoods that beginners should stay away from?
Expensive hardwoods.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is your first projects should be using inexpensive wood. You will make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. And you don't want to do that on a $200 board. You know.
Do you give selection advice to beginners?
Yes.
Okay. Covered
And
that.
that would be selection advice right there.
What are the 3 least expensive hardwoods that beginners should start with?
Poplar, red oak. I'd like to say hickory. It's inexpensive, but hickory can be an SOB to work with. As people like to say, hickory makes dull tools cry.
How many different hardwoods do you keep in inventory?
I'm going to say approximately 60.
Okay.
60 different species.
That's the end of the questions.
That's the end of the
Thank you,
questions.
Craig.
All right.
That was a very good presentation. I appreciate it.
What an amazing presentation, Craig. I know our members, everybody, picked up a few nuggets of great information, so thank you. To close out our meeting, I wanted to make sure everyone knew that our next program in February will be on Gorilla Glues. In March, we'll have a discussion on CNC. And then we have Rockstar Weekend with Michael Fortune. I know you're not going to want to miss this. We have 40 slots. I know about a third of them are already booked. So if you're interested, go out to the website and sign up. And then in closing, again, I just want to thank everyone for all you do and participate with the Guild, making it a great, strong organization. We didn't get to have cake this month, but I promise you we will in April. So thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Well, I'll help close this out. We did have a couple of questions and comments, which I appreciate. There was one we had from Adrian Duell, and it had, for the biology of oak, quarter saw material shows the ray parenchyma. Did I do that all right? Hence the figuring. Am I remembering that right? Does anybody have any idea what Adrian's talking about, and can you answer his question? If not, we will do our best to try and look that one up and get back to you. No?
No worries. I was just curious.
Okay. Well, if we can find out, we will.
Thank you.
Okay. Somebody asked about yellow heart, and they thought they saw some there the last time. Of course, I don't need to read all these. You've seen them as well. But yeah, I mean, when we were out there Tuesday and he was presenting and Hal was recording, it was like, holy cow. I mean, this guy has more knowledge that he shared with us tonight than I've seen in a long time on wood, especially on hardwoods. So he is a wealth of knowledge. He's anxious to talk to anybody that has questions. He's very generous with his time and his information. So truly, if you can get out there, if you've got a project, definitely check him out. Any other questions for any of the board, or just any other discussion that anyone wants to have?
Adrian had asked a question earlier about the hardness of sapwood versus hardwood. I have no idea if it's the same hardness or not.
Me neither. Adrian, you asked that one as well? Is that what I heard?
That was actually more of a comment.
Okay.
In working with particularly something like the walnut, the sapwood's softer, so you just have to be a little careful with the whiter part of the wood.
Oh, okay. You've actually experienced that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
Anyone else?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
So just wanted to, obviously Craig is very anti-air drying, it seems to me. And I wanted to point out, so there's a whole lot of very experienced woodworkers who would not ever build anything that wasn't air dried. So there's a lot, what he said is certainly a lot of, in many ways true. But I'll give you an example. Well, if you take walnut, if you go to the store and or his air dried walnut and you compare it to air dried walnut, the air dried walnut is much prettier. If you kiln dry a hardwood, it leaches color out of the wood. So that's one thing. That's a definite. There's no question about that. He mentioned the acclimatization isn't necessary in kiln dried lumber that's dried to or whatever, and you put it in a very humid room and leave it there for a year. I guarantee you, it's not going to say 6%. It's going to increase the moisture, just as air dried lumber, which might be 9 or 10%. You put it in a very dry room, it's going to gradually become closer. But there's no question it'll never get down to kiln dried. Kiln drying, it actually damages the lignin in the wood. A basic component of wood is lignin, and I think that makes it harder. Not just drier, it makes it harder. So it's much harder to work with, such as carving and so on. So there are many benefits, and you'll find a whole lot of people who would argue vehemently that they prefer air dried. That's all I'm going to say. So any other comments?
All right. Well, it's one of those things where you have to look at your application that you're going to, with your wood. And you're right. There's probably no one right way to do it consistently. So you have to know what you want the wood for and what your project is to figure out if it's kiln or air dried to be best.
So actually that brings up a really interesting point. So if, for instance, I have the humidifier in my house set to 35 or 40% humidity, and I bring a board in that was kiln dried to 6%, it might be fine if I cut it that day. But if I wait 3 days, now the outside of the board has higher humidity than the inside, and I need to wait longer for the whole board to equalize.
Again, I'm not an expert, but you may be right. I think a lot of people do talk about letting the wood acclimatize to the environment that it's going to be in. But a kiln dried is not going to change as much as it is going to change, though.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
A question. He said something about vacuum drying versus kiln drying. Vacuum drying versus kiln drying.
Craig said that? I don't remember him talking about vacuum drying, though.
I think he might have mentioned it. Didn't we, when we were at Dave Stein, didn't he do some vacuum drying? I will not even claim to know enough about the differences to speak, but I'm not even going to go there. But there certainly isn't. That's another way. Jay, do you have any insight to? No,
I'm just picturing vacuuming would be creating a vacuum in the area where you have your wood, and it literally sucking out the moisture, right, as opposed to it doing it by time.
That's right.
Really drying it, though.
So I guess it does it more with air rather than heat.
Yeah.
And may not destroy the wood as much as kiln.
I'm not familiar with that at all, though.
So Jason has put up a link to a site on kiln drying that was down in the chat remarks. If you anybody wanted to go there, take a look. Okay. Well, if no one has any other topics they want to bring up, we can. Okay. Jason's saying it's a business, the link that he posted on the chat. Well, if there's no other discussion, let's keep our fingers crossed that we'll be able to meet in February. If not, we will do this again. It's always nice to get together in person, but we don't want to take any unnecessary risk, and I know no one else does either. Okay, Bill, anything else on the program or anything else you want to mention?
Craig did talk a little bit when we were there about vacuum drying, which has been edited out for time reasons. The one thing I would add about vacuum that and I will repeat what he says because I'm not especially knowledgeable in it. What he said was kiln drying involves drying for a while and then injecting steam and then letting things equalize and then drying again and more steam injection and more equalization. You don't have anything like that in vacuum drying. And the point he was making was you get more equalized moisture through the wood with a professional kiln drying process.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
I think adding the humidity, is that what you said? Humidity or steam?
Yeah.
Steam, yes.
Steam.
One reason they steam it is to try to minimize the decolorization that happens with kiln drying. It's actually a method of trying to keep it from pulling the color out of it as much as it would have if you didn't do that. So.
Okay.
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 All right. Well, I will say let's call this a wrap. Again, Hal, thank you very much for doing all the videoing and editing, and we'll thank Craig. If you get out there, thank him for his presentation and program tonight. He's a joy to talk to. All right, we'll call it, and we'll see everyone one way or another next month.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.